Hello everyone, it's great to see you. How are you coping with the lockdown? Maybe you're missing seeing your friends or missing going to school. But I hope you're not getting too bored. I want to ask you something. What do you do when you've lost something? We always need to lose things just when we really need them. So what do you do? Well, you go hunting for them, don't you? You look in every place where you can possibly think that thing might be that you've lost. I remember once when I was a boy, we lost a kitten. We hunted everywhere and couldn't find it. And the next day, when my mum went to do the washing, she looked inside the copper, which was a tank she used to use to do her washing in. And there was the kitten. It had landed on the lid had flipped over, the kitten had fallen inside, and the lid had kind of landed back on the top of the copper again. You know, Jesus came to find lost people. Not people who are lost in the desert or the jungle or somewhere, but people who are lost to God. He showed such kindness to people who others didn't really want to know. He showed himself to be a friend of sinners. And we're going to think about one of those in a few moments. A man who had plenty of this. Lots of money. But before we do that, we're going to remind ourselves of what we heard during last term, when we're thinking about the life of Jesus. Remember that Jesus was once a child, just like you, except he never did anything wrong. When he was 30, he was baptized in the river by John the Baptist, as a sign that he was dedicating himself to God his Father. And then he heard a voice from heaven saying, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am very pleased." One day he wanted to borrow the boat of a fisherman called Peter, so that he could sit and teach the crowds. When he had finished, he told him to put out his net to catch some fish. He caught so many that the net was full and the boat nearly sank. Then he called Peter and his brother Andrew and their two friends, James and John, to follow him and become his disciples. Jesus often used parables, stories with a special meaning. One was about a young man who wanted his dad's money so he could leave home and enjoy himself. But he spent all of it and became miserable and decided to return home. He wondered what his dad would think. His dad welcomed him back despite how foolish he had been, just like God does when we turn to him. Then there was the day when Jesus was caught in a storm on the sea, and he just commanded the storm to stop, and suddenly all was completely calm. What power to do miracles Jesus had! Well, that was some of the stories we heard last term. But now we're to think about a man called Zacchaeus. He lived in the town of Jericho. Now Zacchaeus, he was a tax collector. He collected money for the Romans who ruled the country. And that made him very unpopular. Besides, he was a greedy and dishonest man who took more money from people than he should. In fact, he'd become a chief tax collector and very rich. Remember the wallet that I showed you? He was a man who was lost, far from God. What hope for a man like him? But he heard that Jesus was in town, and he was curious. He wanted to see him. He was prepared to risk the scorn of the crowds to do so. But he was a short man, and he couldn't see over the crowd. And they weren't going to let him through. So he decided to run ahead, and he climbed up a sycamore tree to get a good view. He watched as Jesus approached. And then, what a shock. Jesus stopped near the tree and called to him, "Zacchaeus, come down, for I must stay at your house today." He was really amazed. He was someone who didn't hate him, someone who loved him, despite the kind of man he was. But the people grumbled. Fancy Jesus going to his house, the house of a sinner. Zacchaeus came down and took Jesus to his home. Perhaps when he got near, he began to feel a bit nervous and embarrassed. He probably had one of the nicest houses in the town, all from the money he got from his greed. Why would Jesus really want anything to do with him? He didn't deserve for Jesus to come to his house. Yet this is what Jesus is like, so loving and kind. He had come to find this lost man. Perhaps it was his embarrassment, or maybe something Jesus said, or just the sense of his goodness, that Zacchaeus couldn't hold back any longer. He confessed how he had taken money he shouldn't, and he promised to put things right. "Lord," he said, "I give half of my money to the poor, and if I have taken anything from anyone wrongly, I will give back 4 times as much." He was a changed man. Jesus received him as one of his own. He was forgiven. He said, "I have come to seek and to save that which was lost." Zacchaeus had been lost, but was now found. Well, I bet Zacchaeus didn't see that coming. What a day that changed his life. Do you know Jesus can change our lives too? We're all lost from God. We've all strayed from the right way and sinned against him. But Jesus shows that he is so kind and loving. He is a friend of sinners. He came to find lost people like us, that we might be forgiven and made his friends forever. No one is too bad. No one is too lost for Jesus. Even those nobody else wants, he's willing to receive if we just listen to him calling us, just as he called Zacchaeus out of that tree. Well, I hope you've enjoyed watching and listening. Hopefully we'll have another story about Jesus next week. Goodbye for now. Thanks for joining us.